the objective conditions under which revolution emerges, justice, grand ideals, these sorts of things. I don't know that you would disagree with me if I were to say that this is window dressing for what actually motivates a revolution, which would be desire, which would be the expectation that something will change for the better, and that by some miracle, one might benefit from this.
I totally disagree.
I would like to know why.
Because revolutions are not acts of all the masses getting on the street together, and that's a complete bullshit lie. Revolutions are a detail of military conquest in history. A revolution is a military act. It's not an act of all society simultaneously jumping up and down and getting out of their homes, and it's like the Hollywood movie Reds and Les Mis. Do you hear the people? No, a revolution is it's a military act. It's a militant thing, okay? And every revolution in history worked like that. Nomadic conquerors came, the people that lived and died by the sword came, and they got rid of the people that ruled sedentary civilizations. And if they stayed in power, it was because of the passive acceptance of the population.
Right.
So in China, the PLA, it swam among the people like a fish in the sea. But at the end of the day, the PLA, those were the nomadic conquerors. They took over China. The amount of people actually fighting with guns is a minority of the population. And it's always going to be a minority who are the militants, who actually are organized enough and cohesive enough to enact political change. The Bolsheviks Stalin called them a military religious order, okay? The Bolsheviks were a minority of the pop. Not everyone's going to be a Bolshevik. So support from the masses and the people, 90% of it is passive. The 10% of active support is very important. But at the end of the day, human existence is based in labor. To be a human being is to be a laboring being. It's not to be a political subject. Politics, according to Marxism, is not a good thing. Politics is a parasitism, because human existence should just be about labor, should be about living. Okay, that's the purpose of life, is to live. Politics, a way of living in devotion to, deciding how people should be led and all this kind of stuff, that's an exception, because the subject of politics, by definition, it's a 95% majority who are just living normal lives, human lives. So, the problem there's no issue in terms of, we're not in a revolutionary system. The problem is an issue of organization. The problem is an issue of leadership. We don't have the militants. We don't have the people. And why don't we have them? Because they're not being led in the right ways. Because they're not being organized and they're not being guided in the right ways. The material is there. It absolutely is there. But the clarity, the consciousness is not there. That's the factor we're missing, the consciousness. Absolutely. Abso-fucking-lutely, it's a theory problem. It's a consciousness problem. I mean, material conditions are totally fine. People don't have their shit together because they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And they don't know anything about the world they're living in. Literally nothing.
I'm concerned with a bit more detail about consciousness, because I'm thinking in particular about these types of people who are militants. And if I'm trying to explain their behavior and their willingness to fight from a material perspective, I can't say that what they're really concerned with is justice in itself, with regard to some absolute principle that they're loyal to or functionaries of. Ultimately, people persist in spite of these explanations.
Look,
that they give
I'm sorry, but you're not going to convince me that the Bolsheviks, were looking to have the prices of bread be lowered, because Bolsheviks were people that lived terrible fucking lives, living in Siberia. They sacrificed everything. These were people that sometimes came from very, very wealthy backgrounds, like Dzerzhinsky, who came from a noble background, noble lineage. These are people who could have chosen to be lawyers that are successful. They could have chosen to be very wealthy. They could have chosen to use their talents and skills elsewhere. Instead, they chose to dutifully serve a higher cause. You can't explain the Maos and the Che Guevaras in terms of some kind of vulgar material self-interest. You just can't. There's no way. How do you explain Che Guevara doing what he did? He wants the price of Labubus to go down. He don't give a fuck about that. Okay.
I guess that sounds to me like the kind of perspective that I try to get away from as a kind of as a kind of idealism. I think that we have to
It's not
understand.
idealism, okay? What you're talking about is a vulgar. It's not even vulgar materialism. Because vulgar materialism, that's the French mechanists and maybe Spinoza or something. What you're talking about is just cynicism. Cynicism is not materialism.
I'm not suggesting that looking at
Yeah,
things.
people are motivated by living a life that matters. People want their life to matter. They want to have it be for something. That's not idealistic. That's just, if you really want to get into the weeds of Marx's human materialism, of the human for himself, for itself, and how Marx comprehends morality and principle and all those kind of things, I recommend you read the early Marx, because he provides a materialist framework that explains why people, from a materialist perspective, do this. But, the cynicism thing, it's just nonsense to me.
I guess I don't believe that people are ultimately only motivated by kind of ulterior motivations. I guess I'm not trying to say that Lenin or any of the Bolshevik militants only expected to lower the price of Labubus. I'm not saying that they weren't prepared to die. What I want to understand, and I guess this is precisely the answer that I wanted. What I want to understand is the fact that they were willing to give their lives, that they could have been lawyers,
Yeah.
that they could have been any of these types of things. But there is some means by which someone in a position, typically disposing its inhabitants to kill for Labubus, is instead willing to do something that most of the time we can only really explain in terms of, fealty to some higher justice for its own sake.
Well, look, how do people become a Che Guevara? How do they become Lenin? How do they become Dzerzhinsky or Mao? How does a human being become that? Well, a lot of the time, people are confronted with something called truth, and they're given a choice. They can ignore truth and do the convenient thing, or they can be in the embrace of truth, and they can live by correct principles and by what's right. And some people make that choice. And all it takes is a minority. That's all it takes. Most people cave to social pressure and they cave to what's convenient and what's immediate to them. But some people are motivated by something bigger because they see the falseness of immediate social satisfaction for whatever reason. They comprehend its falseness. They comprehend that their humanity and their existence is not being satisfied in the immediate consumption of things or the getting the approval and satisfaction of their peers, that there's something missing that this is not fulfilling. And I think all human beings, by the way, experience this. It's just that not all of them have the intelligence to comprehend what that thing which is missing is. But sometimes people discover it, sometimes by accident. And once they discover it, it's very difficult to sell out unless you become disillusioned. You despair and you become disillusioned and you become cynical. That's how people sell out. When people sell out, it's not because, their appetites are so strong and the desire that compels them to want to consume is just too great. That can be overcome with discipline. The problem is that people lose belief, and loss of belief is an existential form of confusion. It's not a default state. It's a form of confusion and ultimately a form of misery. There's not a single happy person in the fucking world who doesn't have belief. I don't care how wealthy they are, how much money they have. I don't care how easy they have it. There's something missing. And they will tell you that themselves. So sometimes when people like Che Guevara and Lenin and Mao discover the thing which is missing, which is truth, which is a life in service to a greater cause, which is an authentic existence, to live in commensurability with one's being as a human, not just as a human, but as a real being, why would they trade that for anything in the world? Why would they trade something invaluable for anything else? What is more valuable than that? What matters more than that?
I've tried to convince myself to do various things with the very same sorts of
Put it this way,
work.
some people are intelligent and some people are stupid. That's the truth. Because some people will say, "Oh, I'd rather have a Bugatti." That's a short-term desire. You're gonna get the Bugatti, you're gonna get fucking bored of it, and you're gonna realize it doesn't fucking matter. People who have intelligence say, "I already see where this is going. I already see myself driving a Bugatti, and my existence is not fulfilled in this. But this cause, this does fulfill my existence. This does satisfy my existence." This is a proper way to live. And they have the foresight to comprehend that because they understand what it is. They understand that cutting past all the bullshit, which is impressing your fellow stupid people about how much shiny, dumb bullshit things you have, ultimately doesn't fucking matter, and it's not worth living for. It's just not. I mean, ask the people who made it, and they'll tell you they're all shooting up drugs to pursue other pleasures and desires because it's not enough for them. It's not a real human existence.
Well,
Every single person who lives in this stupid animal-like way of just wanting short-term pleasure is fucking miserable. And actually, the people that are living for money to get their grind up, it's the grind that's motivating them. It's the story of overcoming and persevering against all odds that's giving them meaning. Once they fucking make it, they're the most miserable people in the world.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I think that you're absolutely right about it all. I guess you were right to say that I probably have reading to do with Marx. With regard to understanding the greater cause that motivates any revolutionary as part of that revolutionary's own cause, as one with their nature after a certain pleasure. Something ultimately akin to the sorts of superficial pleasures, but only
Well,
more
not a superficial pleasure, because you know what it is that ultimately you realize something in life. Very few people end up realizing this, but some manage to, and these are the people that become the revolutionaries. You realize something in life that all of your happiness, all of your suffering, all of your pain, all of your pleasure, the whole spectrum, everything you go through, all of it is not for you. You are not the subject. It's really not for you. Everything meaningful, everything noble, everything enduring is at a scale of history, something so beyond ourselves that all we can do is live a life in service to it because it's not for us as individuals. It's just not. Human beings exist at a scale of multitudes and in time of generations. And this is what matters. This is what it's all for. And when you start to realize this, that almost all human suffering is meaningless, it's absolutely meaningless for no reason, for nothing. You're unhappy because you don't have the money that you want, you don't have the things that you want, you're not the person you want to be. All of this is just meaningless. And what actually matters is something so much more fundamental, so much more essential.
where I suppose I'm going to have to, and on an instinctual level, I absolutely agree with everything you're saying. On an instinctual level, I feel that. And I know what you're talking about when you talk about the rejection of and the worthlessness of superficial goods and the fact that there's no really explaining, human suffering in terms of any grand cosmic meaning. I mean, ultimately, I think that goes for anything. I mean, ultimately, I have to reckon the truth that I feel in what you're saying with the fact that nothing, and I'm not saying this in some ridiculous, like, Rick and Morty nihilist sense, but nothing really matters. Everything in history really is ours. It has to be ours somehow. It has to be for us, or else there'd be no way to understand the reason that objectively existent human beings see worth in their participation in it.
Everything is not for us because we only exist for a finite amount of time. What's for us is the obligation to keep it moving. That's it. That's what's for us. The duty to give back to everything that was given to us in order to exist. Give back and keep it moving.